What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with, of course, another Detroit Lions video. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Lions' defensive side of the ball, focusing on the Lions' defense in this video, which has kind of been under fire really since the loss to the Seattle Seahawks, where we gave up 41 points defensively, a team that was coming in only scoring 15 a game. It's been under fire since then. I mean, they didn't punt the ball one time. And while last week I thought was much better against the New England Patriots, we were also facing a third-string quarterback, and it wasn't an offense that was extremely dominant, especially in the receiving room. So today I wanted to dive into this defense now, heading out of the bye week into the Lions' second part of the season, take a look at some things that have been issues for the Lions, also what's different from this year versus last year, and maybe some of the ways the Lions could look to potentially help their defense going forward, because we're looking for answers. So let's get it started.
Fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and we're back with another Lions video, and I really wanted to dive into the defensive side of the ball. Now, every game going forward is going to feel like a must-win, but it really does start this week with Dallas. You're 1-4. You got 3 teams in the NFC East who have at least won 4 games, and I don't want to talk about playoff picture and things like that now, but you know that every game is super important. It does start with one, as Campbell said, and having 2 weeks to prepare for this Dallas team, but also potentially getting some players back, which should be helpful as well. This week I'm talking, not down the road. I know Jameson, all that stuff, we'll see. But this week, getting some guys back, hopefully, that could help us out. And also possibly some changes, mixing it up a little bit defensively, now that you've had a little bit of extra time. It's tough to do that from week to week. Now, we've done different things from week to week, but more bigger changes maybe defensively, personnel-wise, just identity-wise, how we're going to do this thing going forward to try to get it back on track a little bit. Last week against New England actually wasn't terrible for this Lions defense. It wasn't that bad actually at all. Now, the biggest issue is probably that we continue to give up too many explosive big plays, whether that's a couple of pass interference calls on Jeff Okudah, whether that's 2 monster runs. Okay, one of them came earlier in the game on their second drive for 49 yards, which just made their rushing stats look crazy. All right, we've given up too many chunk plays on early downs. That's been an issue. And then, of course, there's also the third down issue, which has been an issue on the season, where we're giving up 50% conversion rate. Well, one part of that is that there's a lot of third and shorts teams are facing, which is tough on your defense. And at the same time, we haven't gotten teams into many third downs, which is usually not good either. Only 62, which I think is the third least in the NFL. So there's a lot of things going on here that are a problem. And I definitely don't think you can just say, well, this one player is killing us, or it's all on Aaron Glenn, he's the guy. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. But I think there's a lot of different areas that you can look at here that are issues for the Lions defense, and maybe some of the ways the Lions can look to try to fix some things. Not to be the best defense in football, but to try to get a little bit more consistent on the year. And I thought last week we saw a couple of things that maybe anticipated. We saw a ton of man coverage, which has been the case all year. We're going to talk about that. The Lions continue to kind of dial back a little bit on blitzing. Personnel changes were made, and I doubt that a lot of those stay the same, but some of them may. We'll see what they do, going forward, heading into the bye week. Now, I think they maybe just want to get a look at all of their guys going into the bye week. That way they could try to evaluate what certain guys could do or what they look like this year versus last year, so that they can feel like this guy, we feel good with starting him. Plus, this was a matchup against a third-string quarterback with a pretty average receiving core that you felt like maybe you could try to mix some things up. So I think that's why a lot of that did happen, and I don't anticipate that all of those changes are going to be the same going forward. We'll see. But it was better last week. We did much better on third down in that game. England was only really 3 for 8 on the game. They were actually technically 3 for 9, but they kneeled it down at the end, so I'm not going to count that. They were really 3 for 8 on the game, which is 37.5%, which isn't bad. Of course, that's, for one, that's a very small number. The last one was a kneel down, as we said. That's a very small number of third downs forced. All right, there's been drives in multiple games where teams don't even face third down. They just pick up chunk after chunk after chunk. There's a great example in that Seattle Seahawks game where they basically had 3 chunks. One was a roughing the passer, and they ended up scoring a touchdown in just like 5 plays, but the Lions didn't force any third downs because every first down play was a chunk play. And we're going to talk about the run defense versus pass defense specifically in 1 second. But in that Patriots game last week, on average, the third down distance was only 5.5 yards, which is not very long. Now, I don't have the comparison to other teams. I would have to go through and mark each team because I did this by hand. So I don't know in comparison to other teams what that is, but I can tell you that this season Lions are allowing 6.5 yards per play. So you can see how mathematically that's not very good. In this game, the good is that we actually stopped the third and shorts. Specifically with run defense, we got a couple of stops on third and shorts. And the ones that we gave up, they're all pretty explainable, right? You take a look at the one where Deshaun Elliott was injured on the play. There was a play early where Will Harris in man coverage on a 3rd and 5 was beat on like a whip route. They gave up 12 yards there. So they're explainable. You can see how they happened. But that is definitely an area where the Lions are going to have to be better going forward. And you take a look at a team like Seattle, for example. We forced them into more third down attempts. They had 12 third down attempts. Not a lot of long third down attempts. Only 5.75 yards per third down attempt on average. The issue with that, again, is we're giving up 6.5 per play, and in that game we were giving them 8.8 yards per play, which is kind of just strung that huge number out, specifically because they have 2 huge runs, but 8.8 yards per play. And as we know, 2 third and longs, well, 1 3rd and 16 they picked up for a touchdown because we were broke down schematically, and we allowed 9 for 12 in that game. There was a couple of those. There's a couple of scrambles that we allowed based on how we're doing things defensively in coverage versus maybe how we would have done them coming into the year, how things have transitioned a little bit. So we're going to talk about all that, but with that, let's dive into the Lions' run defense first. Let's start there. We'll come back to the pass defense because there's a lot of things that I want to touch on there, but we'll start with the run defense. We'll kind of fly through that, then we'll get into the pass coverage. One area for the Lions' run defense to this point, which actually hasn't been terrible to this point, is the Detroit Lions' front 4. Now, you can't really see this with the numbers, but the Lions' front 4 hasn't been that bad. I believe they're tied for like the middle of the pack in terms of run stop win rate, but a lot of the Lions' run defensive issues, specifically the big chunk plays, right, not the 3-4 yard pickups, the chunk plays have been Seattle, a couple of schematic breakdowns, Minnesota zone cutbacks where we don't have a guy there, or on top of that, Minnesota also did a lot of outside runs where basically they would just pin down our cornerback, right? He would dive inside, they pin him down, and then they'd pull 2 offensive linemen, sweep him outside, and now they had lead blockers and they pick up like 10 yards. Teams have tried to do that since then. The Patriots, teams have tried to do it. Teams have been somewhat successful. Sometimes we've been good against it where, someone gets out there. One time against the Patriots, Will Harris doesn't dive outside. He hesitates. He gets kind of picked up, and now there's no edge contain. He picks up 4 yards and a first down. I think that was actually one of their third down pickups. Maybe it was a second down. But that has been an issue against the run. But specifically the front 4 has not been the lead issue against the run, which is a positive because that is something that you believe that you could fix. You could fix that. You could improve there if it is not the simple fact that your defensive line is just getting blown off the ball. Because if that is the case, now it's very difficult. Now you're just throwing more bodies because you know that you can't stop the run. Your front 4 can't hang with their front 5. That's a very big problem. But that hasn't been the case. Now, one thing we have seen is that the Lions have gotten very aggressive. Specifically, last week we saw it. Of course, they're playing this one gap style attacking defense. And last week it really showed like play actions, linebackers biting inside. It happened a little bit later, but Mike Hughes was in good coverage and they tried to get a shot, so it wasn't there. But that is something that the Lions have done is they played super aggressive. And one thing that we know is that if you're going to play a one gap aggressive style, you better win your lane. You better fill your lane correctly, because if you don't, if one guy doesn't, that could lead to a big run because you're being aggressive, you're getting downhill, that could lead to a huge run. This is just a play. This is just a zone run defensively, but this is where the Lions have been good. Their interior guys, the 2-eyes, the 3s, holding against a double team or playing off the backside. Now, this was a Philly run where you can see that Aiden Hutchinson crashes down on the offensive tackle. They kind of slide like a play we're going to see here soon, and then Malcolm's able to get around the edge. Charles crashing down from the backside, and we've seen that. It's been different guys at different times. You had the one big run against the New England Patriots, which really just shot out their rushing numbers like crazy. There was a 49-yard rush early in the second drive of that game where you can see the Lions one gap defensively, and you can see how Malcolm Rodriguez looks like he's filling the C as they slant their defensive line inside, which is what the Lions have done in the past. We saw it against Minnesota. They slant their defensive line inside, so they slant in. Malcolm fills around towards the C. Then you see Alex Anzalone kind of diving outside towards the D gap, but then he cuts upfield, and there's a nice lane. Lions don't make a tackle. 49-yard pickup on that play. So when you're aggressive like that, it can bite you, but at the same time, you can get some negative plays, and the Lions have had some of those. So you can understand that. I don't have an issue with how they're doing it schematically, but the two big reasons that I think are run defense specifically, and every game has been different, but two big things that have shown up are when teams pull offensive linemen's power, specifically sweeps, however, when they do that and they break edge contain for us, or quarterback scrambles, which we saw specifically against a team like Seattle, where the Lions defensively, sometimes they had a spy and they still got us. But a lot of times what you see is the Lions started started dedicating more guys to coverage, specifically in man coverage. Why did they do that? They do that because they did not trust their ability to match up one-on-one with a DK Metcalf or even a Tyler Lockett. So they would utilize both safeties to help double team those two receivers. Well, just do the math. You got 4 receivers, all right, 4 cornerbacks in man, 2 safeties help out, that's 6. You got 5 guys left. All of a sudden, one linebacker gets a running back. Now you got 4 guys. You're no longer blitzing. Quarterback takes off. He can run. Philly first. So, of course, this game we give up 5.5 yards per carry. We know they're just running the ball well in general because they have a lot of options, and one of those is Jalen Hurts. We struggled in this game to stop the run for sure, but Hurts' ability to run, take off, and scramble led to a lot of these big numbers as well. When you take a look at very early in the game, both of our linebackers are covering the same guy. He scrambles for 11 yards. Teams have done a good job, and specifically Seattle was great at taking what the defense was giving them pre-snap. New England did pretty well at that as well, just attacking what we were showing them pre-snap. But it's happened in different ways. But those 2 runs specifically have given us issues. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. You look at the Washington game, only 4.2 yards per carry. Defensive day, specifically for that front 4, we were great. Now, their 2 runs that they had were kind of chunk runs towards the end of the game. They had Carson Wentz for a scramble. We were sitting in zone. He took off for like 18. And also Curtis Samuel, like a 20-yard reverse or end around, picked up, like 20 yards. So that kind of boosted their yards per carry number. But their 2 running backs basically did nothing. 14 carries for 28 yards, another back at 3 carries for 9 yards. So they were great in that game. Minnesota, in that game we dominated on the defensive line. As we kind of expected, they did. Minnesota, 4.9 yards per carry. Now this one, what was giving us issues, and we did film videos on all these games, so feel free to check them out, is that this one, a lot of zone cutbacks, while also Minnesota started to utilize a lot of the pinning down our cornerback, kicking offensive linemen towards the outside. We've had good ones, like Jeff Okudah last week against New England. He got outside and he allowed Sean Elliott to get out there and help make a tackle. But when team run these sweeps, and they basically, when we're in man coverage, they put a tight or a slot alignment receiver. We have one guy there, and then all of a sudden they run like a slant and they kind of squeeze in, or somehow they pin them down towards the line of scrimmage and they kick guys out. Now we have runs that are created towards the outside, and that's what Minnesota did. Those 2 things, zone cutbacks and that type of run, gave us issues in that game. 4.9 a carry. Seattle, multiple scrambles in this one. We just hit on how that happened, and we saw it when we looked at the film on some of their runs. Couple of designs, like they had a design with inside the 10 where basically Malcolm Rodriguez had no chance to get over there and they scored a touchdown. So there was different, types of runs in this one, but quarterback scrambles were the biggest part. And also, of course, Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny averaged 8.8 yards per carry in this game, had 151 yards. But obviously there were 2 massive runs that were, again, scheme dependent, where the Lions were in a bad spot pre-snap and they attacked that. Teams have done a good job, specifically Seattle, of attacking what we show pre-snap, where they made the change. One was the 3rd and 16. They busted it for like 36-yard touchdown. Then they had one later for 41 yards, where the first time we showed a zero coverage look, so there's no one in the back end. All they do is they pull an offensive lineman. Our backside doesn't get there in time, and there you go. There's no guy there defensively, and you have a touchdown. Later in the game, we go single high. This time, they pull 2 offensive linemen. They outnumber us. We don't make a play off the backside, and he's basically untouched for another touchdown run. Those were 2 examples of Lions at the line of scrimmage. Basically, their defense, based on how we were pre-snap aligned, had no chance, and we gave up 2 massive touchdown runs. So we averaged 8.8, but if you take those 2 out, he only averaged 4.9 on the day, which is still high. They had powers, they had things like that gave us problems, but it was schematically being lined up in the wrong spot, and the offense taking advantage of that at the line of scrimmage, and they were crucial. I mean, one was on 3rd and 16. That's crucial. That's get off the field territory. We would have, but they got to repeat the down. New England Patriots, now this last week, as you can see, 5 yards per carry in this game, and again, this has been an issue with the Lions. This is where we'll talk about first down defense, chunk plays. The Lions have given up too many chunk plays so far this season. Now, you take a look at first downs in particular. That's a good spot to look. Well, take a look at this Patriots game, this last one, for example. On first downs, he didn't throw it often, 7 times for 93 yards. That's including, flags, because he had a couple of PIs in there. Well, I think it was just one PI from Okudah on first down. But a PI in there, which obviously, you have to add, that's 22 yards. But 13.28 yards when passing the ball on first down. Versus on running the ball on first down, which was 5.5. And again, what's making that big 5 yards per carry number, but also the 5.5, is the 149-yard run that they had early in the game. Now, this is something that we saw at the Lions. I thought you definitely saw it last week, how aggressive they were, or 2 weeks ago, with their linebackers. But this is something they've been all year, and I don't expect this to change. And I don't necessarily want it to change because it leads to negative runs. It leads to the 3rd down and 1, where we get a minus 2-yard run, and we get a stop behind the line of scrimmage. So you want negative plays on early downs. You got to be aggressive. The Lions schematically, they kind of fit that bill, and that's what they've been. They've been aggressive. And now that one was like a 3-3-5 look. That run, and they had one later in the game, another pulling offensive lineman that broke another one, and you take those 2 out, 3.7 on the game. Our defensive line did well, but again, use power pulling kick outside runs. At times we've been getting in bad spots and they lead to big runs. That has been the issue. An issue with us is too many chunk plays. Now, majority of those chunk plays haven't been the run game, even though they have been in the past with Seattle, again, schematically being lined up incorrectly, but more so the pass game, we've given up a lot of chunk plays. One thing that we saw starting with the Washington game, I believe, is that they came out in the second half and they started to spread us out defensively. Take a look at the first half. We had them pinned back. They did a lot of under center things. Lions were aggressive. They got a couple of sacks in there. But we were aggressive in that first half. We were able to be. We were shutting down their run game, and they were trying to set up some shots off of play action, but they didn't have time and things like that. Second half, a little bit different. They started to spread us out. And what teams have started to do a lot of the time, and every team's going to be different. New England didn't do it as often as, say, some of these other teams did because they don't play that same style. But teams that do, a lot of teams in the league right now play a lot of shotgun, spread us out and put us in really tough situations, because what happens is that when they spread us out defensively, again, whether that's four receivers, also a running back, is they put us in a predicament where we have to decide, do we want to play zone coverage where we're not really getting a lot of pressure with our front four, which is somewhat of a byproduct of the fact that the guy that led your team in pressures went down with an injury, a wrist injury. We hope that he can be back. He'll be part of the reason that hopefully we improve and get some more pass rush, because when teams spread us out, they go to some of these obvious looks. There was an example against Seattle where they went empty and our in pass rushers were like Michael Brockers and I think it was Aleem McNeil. That's not going to cut it. We're not getting enough win rate, and right now the Lions are actually winning at the lowest rate in the NFL, 30% pass rush win rate, which is 32nd. So now they put us in a tough spot where it's like, okay, do we play zone coverage where they're not winning that quickly, so there's going to be holes in your coverage? Do we play man coverage, which takes you all the way back to where before the season started? I know we're kind of bouncing around here, but let's do this. One different from this year versus last year, the Lions are playing a lot more man coverage. Now, unfortunately, I can't give you the exact number on it by this time last year versus this year. I can't give you the exact number. I was unable to find it, but I did find charts on like, okay, what coverage are they playing by week? And you could see last year was more zone coverage. Maybe this is something that we should have somewhat anticipated coming into the year just based on some of the personnel the Lions brought in. You take a look at the personnel we brought in this offseason and changes we made. Let's just think about this for a second. Chris Board, why do we bring him in? Well, he can play coverage. He's a third down basically player, but he can match up in coverage and he blitzes. Okay, that makes sense. Iffy, he moved to safety. Why? Well, maybe because of the fact that there are matchups in man coverage that he's going to struggle with, but at the same time, he is a matchup piece for a safety where he could line up on tight ends and help us. He hasn't really done that this year, but now it makes a lot of sense. Kirby Joseph, Deshaun Elliott, Ike Hughes. Why? He's a much better man coverage player than AJ Parker versus what we saw last year. So even though Parker could play zone, you want more matchup piece? Well, there you go. Jeff Okudah returns from injury. He's a press man corner coming out of college. That's how they're using him. So it actually kind of makes sense when you start to put together like, okay, what are the offseason moves that we made? And then you're like, oh, this is probably why the Lions are playing a lot of more man. But that's not all of it. Some of that is, game-based. We'll talk about that. However, also, you have to take a look at basically the kind of tell that maybe Aaron Glenn gave us a little bit coming into the year of his 3 Ds. I believe these are the 3 correct Ds that he gave us. It's okay, let me be accurate here. I think these are the 3. But basically it was disrupt, deny, and defend. I think that's the correct order. So when you took a listen to what he said, first one being disrupt, he talked about how a lot of teams weren't utilizing within 5 yards, disrupting receivers at the line. Well, playing more man coverage, he wants to be disruptive. We saw it last week, perfect example. Think about who he put at safety. Right now, they took Elliott out, which was a big mistake, and I don't expect that to be something that they do going forward. But who do they put at safety? They put a cornerback. Why? Because he can play man coverage. So, disrupt. They tried disrupt at the line of scrimmage. That's something that we've seen this year. That ties in with this first D. The second one was deny, where he talked about playing leverage correctly, right? And that, of course, to man coverage. Perfect example is an easy one, but take a look at Minnesota, right? The Lions, what they did was they basically had Jeff Okudah mirror, follow Justin Jefferson everywhere, slot, outside, wherever he went, and what they did was they consistently utilize safety help. So now this comes back to playing, where's my leverage? Where's my help? He utilized safety, so where was his safety help? Linebacker help. And then finally, defend, making a play on the football. So it ties in with the 3 Ds that he gave us. Also, when you take a look at the moves that we made this offseason. But now let's take a look at the statistics of it week by week. You can see it at the top there. Lions man coverage rates by week, 59, 36, 71, almost 72%. We'll talk about why. About 46% and 68% last week against New England. Now, every game is different. So, for example, you take a look at Seattle, 45.7%. It's still a lot, but it was less. Why was it less? Well, in that game, it's not like we were up big and it was like we're just playing soft zone. No, that wasn't the case. The reason it's lower, the weapons that they had. So, while the Lions, at times, we just touched on it, would utilize safeties, man coverage, they spread us out. We'd have two safeties help out, but now all of a sudden, it's tough because it's tough to blitz or you have to spy, and it's really difficult because you have less bodies. Or it was that the Lions would play zone coverage in this game, and a lot of this game they played cover 3, cover 6. Kind of takes you back to last year a little bit. They played a lot of that in this game because they were worried about getting beat over top. Kind of takes you back to what they did last year with Amani, and he played a lot of cover 3 defense last season, probably because of some of the personnel and how deep we were into the cornerback room. We didn't have Jeff. You had AJ at slot who didn't play very good man coverage, so you played a lot more zone coverage, a lot of cover 3 last season. Now, when you take a look at the individual effect on that, of course, Amani Oruwariye. Amani last season, he was really nice last year, but one thing that was clear is that he didn't do very well in man coverage, even last season. Now this year, unfortunately, it's been kind of a disaster, and credit to other teams, sometimes they put him in bad spots. Even when we played cover 3 in that game, it didn't mean that Amani balled out, because he didn't. Because sometimes they would put us in tough spots where there's a lot to look at with some of their full house looks, also in zone coverage, just beating our zone coverage by, having someone run vertically, and then have someone underneath it, and you put Amani in a tough spot, he may carry, and then all of a sudden you have an open underneath route. And they did the same thing. It's not like this is brand new. They're the only team we did against. I went back and watched San Francisco. They had the same type of zone beaters that we had. But for Amani as a whole last year, as we know, we played a lot more cover 3, and that's where he shined. Cover 3. Cover 2, he was good. If you want to just take a look at PFF grades, because it's true. Like, this isn't something that it's like, well, don't trust PFF here. Like, no, you can literally watch the film, and we did coming into the year. We talked about how Amani struggles a little bit more in man coverage, and that's not where he's great. He's not very sticky in man, but in zone, he was really good. And you could see it based on last year, and you could see it this year. Just a little visual based on what PFF gave him last season. In cover 3, which is over 100 snaps that he played, a 79.4 grade, which is like their good to great category. A 61.3 in cover 2 zone. That's like above average to good or something there. Cover 6, 77.8. Again, that's a very high category for them. It's a great grade. Cover 1 man, 44.8. Now, he had a couple of interceptions there, which helped his pass rating look very good from those situations. 44.8 is not a good grade. That is below average for their grading system. That's not good. So you can see that this year, with the Lions playing more man coverage, that has been an issue directly for a guy like Amani. Now, even in zone, I would doubt that his grades are very good this season. Number one, he hasn't had interceptions this year. But on top of that, teams again have done a good job of beating some of that zone coverage. I think at times we've done it not great at showing what we're going to be in coverage-wise. I think that has been an issue at times. Now, there's no question players got to make plays, and it's very difficult. I understand whether it's Amani getting called for a flag or Okudah getting beat over top. It's tough to work with that. But at the same time, I would like to see the Lions just be a little bit more creative post-snap at times, because I think they have gotten a little bit predictable at times pre-snap with what they're showing and then what they're running out of it, where teams have made checks at the line, whether it's Seattle, New England, changes in the second half. Teams run these coverage beaters. I mean, this is a 4 vertical stem. They know Alex is going to open up. Lions have been playing this coverage towards the strong receiver side, which is the slot, and they're going to leave a 2-on-1. Now, yes, Bobby Price probably could do a better job forcing this inside to give Chase Lucas a little bit more space, and it's 2 young guys, so this is difficult. But at the same time, you've been seeing this look, and when you don't disguise often enough, sometimes I think good coaches especially have taken advantage of that pre-snap, which we have seen already this year. And I would like to see more occasions where we get the offense thinking a little bit to make some of those bad decisions. The plays will come with the bad decision-making tied with pressure, and I get it. Players, they got to be better. Now, it's difficult for Glenn because there's only so many things that he can do if you're struggling in coverage one-on-one, if he can't trust his corners one-on-one. And that's why I believe getting Jacobs back could be the biggest get-back that we have, like Taylor Decker coming back at tackle for us last season, especially with how we're trying to play defensively, because he might just be our best cornerback. And, of course, the pressure players will help big time as well, because we're not finishing plays and we're not winning enough aside from Hutchinson here and there. With that being said, I would like to see the Lions maybe mix in some more of that post-snap movement and confusion and chaos that they created at times last year, especially late in the year. But the injury, the point is, though, more man coverage, worse Amani. And he's actually been graded out by Pro Football Focus this year as the worst cornerback in football to this point, I believe. And we've seen that on the film. In that Philadelphia Eagles game, we were very blitz heavy in that game. But again, even with some of those zone looks, they broke routes off early, things like that. He struggled with A.J. Brown a little bit in this game. Maybe you didn't see it, though, as much in this game because there also was some good for sure in this game from him in man coverage. And I think some of that was because while he did have some issues with A.J. Brown, there was also some good reps as well. He's a bigger receiver, and that's what Amani is built to cover up. He's not going to cover up some of these smaller, twitchy receivers very well. Perfect example, last year when he had Justin Jefferson, he basically got ate up because he doesn't match up with guys like that. Also last year against AJ Green, he was really good against Arizona. He was outstanding in that game because that's a bigger, slower receiver who didn't move that well. All right, 36.4%. Now this one I think is definitely skewed because in this game against the Washington Commanders, a big part of this was that in the second half we were leading. We started to play a lot softer zone coverage, while at the same time what they went to, spreading us out more, gave us problems. The lower the man rate there is because of the fact that we were leading in the second half, and that really, led to playing some more zone. Also, there were some injuries. 72% man against Minnesota. Why is that so high? Well, this wasn't like our worst coverage game. It wasn't, but we played the most man. That's not been the issue. The fact is, in this game, we played so much man. Why? Because our game plan in this one was to try to take away Justin Jefferson, which we basically did, and we talked about how we did that. A lot of it was safety help, and what we did was we had Jeff Okuda's shadow and just follow around Justin Jefferson. He also had some good reps on his own, give him some credit, but we played a lot of that. Well, when you have a cornerback shadow a receiver, say for example Jeff to like the slot or wherever he's lining up, you're basically having to play man. But what that also does is it puts a lot of stress on whoever the number 2 cornerback is. It puts a lot of stress on everybody else because while he's getting that help a lot of the time, man coverage, you're stressing that, hey, Amani, you have to be able to cover up their number 2 cornerback or whoever else there is. We're playing man, you got to be able to take that guy away, or not just shut him down, but you have to be able to win more battles than you lose. But obviously that wasn't the case because while the Lions did that, where Minnesota had success was not attacking Jefferson. We did some good there. They also forced some 3rd and long attempts. I think on average it was like 7.7 yards. Yeah, 7.7 yards on average was their 3rd down number that they had to complete. So that's good. They were only 2 of 9 on 3rd down in that game, and a lot of them was we took away Justin Jefferson, we took away that option, and dedicate safeties and help towards Justin Jefferson. Why? Because Kirk Cousins didn't give you a threat of taking off and running. He gives you like 0 threat. Adam Thielen was 1-on-1 with Amani, and a lot of times the defense knew that was going to happen, and the offense knew that was going to happen, and he lost that battle more often than he didn't, right? He lost that battle most of the game. So he, who currently accounts for 40% of our penalties defensively, I don't know if that's the same after the week we didn't have him, but at least going into that week, I think it was 40% of our penalties defensively that he accounts for in that game. What that does is it stresses those guys. So here's an idea, and we're going to probably hit on this more, but an idea that I do have about the defense that the Lions could play going forward is that one thing the Lions could consider, and every game is different, it's dependent, right? You take a look at New England. While, yes, they're just playing a lot of man this year, they're playing it more than anybody else. Also, I think based on who you played. First off, personnel changes were able to be made because they don't have an elite receiving group, and because of that, I think it allowed you to play more man, and they didn't really have a mobile quarterback necessarily. So I think for that game, it made more sense that the Lions played a lot of man in that game. One thing I do look at for the Lions is for them to consider putting their number 1 corner, and again, this is based on game, maybe consider putting your number 1 cornerback, Jeff Okudah, on their number 2. You got to win more often than you lose here, okay? Look, you're going to get beat, but win more often than you lose. Flip it over to the opposite side and say, okay, we're going to take our number 2 cornerback, and we can give you safety help. One positive that I think definitely came out of that New England Patriots game is that we actually have, I think, some very legitimate flexibility where we have linebackers that can play man. One of the things last year Alex showed us, while he's not a shutdown linebacker, he's not the best coverage linebacker, but he can play man coverage, and he can match up against a lot of different guys, and we saw it last week against New England when he had that great pass breakup. He could play man coverage. So you have guys like that. Also, Chris Board, when healthy, I thought Derek Barnes, obviously he had a flag that he picked up with safety help. He still grabbed, and it took away a big time sack for us that could have changed the complexion of that entire drive. Also, guys at safety showed that they could play man. We knew Tracy could, and that's why it's a tough loss, but Deshaun Elliott could play man coverage. He got hurt on one play, but he can do it sufficiently for certain matchups. Now, this is Kirby against Seattle, the touchdown that he gave up, and they've been putting him in these spots, and expect that he'll continue to start. Like we said, if you move to safety, they try to give Savion some looks here. I expect Kirby to continue to start. It hasn't been perfect for him in man, but he does show some upside. It's just taking a little bit of time. You're winning at the lowest rate, and this is why these two things kind of combine well to get pressure. It's tough when you're not getting pressure and your guys aren't winning on the defensive line very often. Hutch will win here and there, and that's why they're having Hutchinson like last week, and they may continue to do this going forward. They're putting him now at weak side defensive end because they're trying to get him as many one-on-ones as possible. And a lot of teams don't play a lot of heavy personnel sets. New England's a little bit different, but most teams don't. So they're trying to get him as many one-on-ones, even if it is against their better left tackle, as possible. And that way, you could look at Kaminsky, you could look at Pascal, who could continue to start at strong defensive end, or if they bring Charles, do they flip it back? That way they can try to get some wins and just hope that, hey, if we play man and we're disruptive and they have to hold the ball a little bit longer, someone eventually is going to get through, or we blitz. But the issue is we haven't been getting really home. If you get a shifty, quicker receiver, you can't put Amani and have Amani basically play, I don't think, like their number one receiver, CeeDee Lamb, and use safety help. You're still going to get burnt there. Why? Because underneath he's not going to be able to cover him. You look at Jerry Jacobs, if he's healthy, based on his body type, his skill set, even though he played some more zone last year because that's what we did as a whole, his skill set, or Mike Hughes, that could help you a little more underneath. Mike Hughes is a perfect example. He may get beat over top, but because of his size and some of his top end speed, but if you have a safety help, now you can kind of bracket it in, take it away. But it sounds like Lions aren't going to do that because they haven't had Jerry Jacobs with enough attempts. So unless A.J. Parker starts at slot, which I don't think is going to happen unless they do that, they don't feel like Jerry Jacobs has gotten enough reps in practice because he's just returning from injury to potentially play slot. So it's probably more likely that if Jerry Jacobs is healthy, he's going to kick it outside. And if they do that, they can continue to play their style defensively. Jerry Jacobs, if he can help him more underneath, which I think he can because he is nasty at the line of scrimmage. And if he is the guy that we saw last year, you give him safety help on their top receiver, which I wanted to see last year. I would have loved to see him match up with Jefferson. We never did it. I would have loved to see it. Fortunately, I don't have the exact number for this, but if you do take a look at the Lions' third downs, pretty much every third down they usually get teams into, they're running some type of man coverage defensively. You just take a look at this last New England Patriots game, almost every third down they were basically playing some sort of man coverage. Now, there was the example where it was a wide receiver tunnel screen they tried to set up that Mike Hughes basically shut down for like a 1-yard gain, where they were disguising and trying to drop into like the Tampa 2 look they were playing all game. There wasn't a ton of variance within their coverage, and I do think that up to this point, what we've seen versus different opponents, we've done different things, and I think that will continue with this Lions defense and how Aaron Glenn approaches each game differently and how he wants to do things in the back end schematically. But A.J. Parker and Will Harris basically gave them a little bit more FBI on the field, more football intelligence on the field. There is one thing that I would say that I would probably like to see more going forward for the Lions, and this could definitely be back to what Aaron Glenn told us. He felt like they got a little bit more football smart with some of the changes that they made, particularly with the A.J. Parkers and the Will Harrises on the field, is I would like to see the Lions do some more post-snap movement. Take me back a little bit to 2021. Now, there was, this was the end of the year of the films that I was watching to see these games, so that probably plays a part in it, but you're doing this with guys like Will Harris, A.J. Parker, who wasn't always even on the field. You did some sets where you didn't have a slot cornerback on the field, you just put an extra linebacker, probably because of some of his issues potentially in man coverage where he's a little bit limited. But if it takes guys like that to potentially do more post-snap movement, I think the Lions are going to have to try to make some sort of adjustment, and that may be one of those adjustments. Kirby Joseph probably also plays a factor into that, being that he's a very young safety and he hasn't played a lot of games. Chris Board, right? There are new additions that are out there, but last season, you saw it by the end of the year for sure, in at least some of those games that I checked on, there was a lot of post-snap movement for the Lions where you didn't really know what was coming, right? You would think something pre-snap, you'd snap, and it was something completely different. To the point where there was a couple times where Rodgers thought he had something, he didn't have it, he's forced to hold the ball just a little bit longer. I still do think the Lions across the board, especially when healthy, have better personnel this year, no question, but their stats are very similar. I think one thing that they could look to is getting back to not only just more zone coverage in general. I mean, I think they'll probably start mixing more of that in, but particularly just a little bit more of the post-snap movements. Now, that's game dependent. They do it all the time, but some games you don't need to do it as many as others, but I think there's definitely occasions there will be going forward where I would like to see the Lions get a little bit more creative, and that takes, if you can't trust Mike Hughes to do that, and they can't have him on the field to do those things, or maybe at the cornerback position, Will Harris can handle that, but I don't know, Amani was there before, so that surprised me a little bit because they did it last year. But is it because you have a young safety? Like, is that what's holding them back from being a little bit more post-snap happy, where they mix more things up? Right now, you get a few of those here and there, but a lot of it you can kind of see and read pre-snap. There's not a ton of movement, or where the Lions try to hide something, where they show one thing pre-snap, it looks like this. Oh, he moved with the motion. It looks like man coverage, or the safety's here, or there's no one lined up on that guy, so it's got to be this, and then post-snap someone just runs over there. There's not as much of that. Yes, Seattle, they ran more cover 3, cover 6, but there wasn't a ton of disguise out there. When you looked at this Patriots game, there was like, again, there are two coverages, either a man variation or it was like a Tampa 2 drop. And while there were like a couple of little things in there disguise-wise, but it was mainly out of this is the personnel set we're coming out in. We may play zone or we may play man, but really don't have a lot of moving pieces going on here. It's kind of stationary and stagnant. And that's one thing I think the Lions, getting back to a little bit last year and what we kind of anticipated when we got here in Glenn, I would like to see maybe just a little bit more of that, more of the movement, more of the confusion that you could put offenses in. And again, that's not all the time. You can't do that all the time. You get yourself into trouble. But there are occasions where you can do that. Third down, I understand why they're playing a lot of man, especially third and short. You know, it's tough to play zone in third and short. That makes sense. Third and long, they've gotten creative. They've dropped guys into coverage. We've seen that. They tried it against the Patriots, and they ended up running a tunnel screen. We made the tackle, so you didn't really even see it happen. So it's not necessarily the third downs, but it's more just base downs, teams that spread you out. Just more post-snap movement for the Lions is something that I would look for, and I would like to see a little bit more of the Lions, you know, going into the second half of the season. And maybe if some of these young guys or new guys figure it out a little bit more, we get to see more of that as we go on. But that is just one noticeable eye test. I can't give you the numbers, but I can just show you that there were even plays last year against, you know, Aaron Rodgers where he's held the ball a little bit longer. Russell Wilson, he doesn't really know what to expect, and the first guy isn't there like he thought it might be there. You kind of give him something and you take it away, and you can just force him to hold the ball a little bit longer. Now, you can't do that versus everybody, and some teams it's not necessary. If you win your matchups, you win your matchups. But I think it's something that Lions aren't consistently winning their matchups, and they could use some more of that creativity. And that's one thing I would like to see added back going into the second half of the season. And I feel like they can do it with a lot of these guys. Like if Jacobs comes back, he can do it because he did it last year. Amani could do it. Will, we know, can do it. And that's the thing about Will, is he's a very smart corner, so he's really good. Does Mike Hughes struggle a little bit in that area? Possibly. Is he better on the outside for those? Well, then there you go, right? Do you need AJ for that? Is it the safety position? Because a lot of the post-snap movement usually comes from the safety position. Usually it's a lot of, okay, safety start too high, then one guy dials down. Usually that's where it takes place. And if you notice, you're not getting a lot of that safety movement from the Lions. Like Deshaun Elliott may move around a little bit. Kirby does a couple little things, like maybe it's man coverage and he'll end up like becoming a robber and he'll drop underneath once they snap it. But it's not a lot of hiding things in coverage like I noticed last year. We're going to play AJ Parker at slot over Mike Hughes, which again, I'm not really, at least for what we're doing this season, I'm not with the idea of doing that. If we continue to play more heavy man, I would not put AJ Parker over Mike Hughes. But if the Lions decided to do that and they changed it up, whatever, I would definitely consider Mike Hughes getting opportunities to play at outside corner, because what we saw last week is that even though they didn't mix up a lot of coverages there, when they did disguise, when they did drop into some of the Tampa 2, the communication between him and Mike Hughes was usually pretty good. For one occasion where he kind of got stuck on top of the receiver, but Mike Hughes seems like he can handle that. That's where Will Harris shines. He's a very smart cornerback. I mean, he's not the most sticky corner. He's a little bit choppy when he moves, and that's kind of still been the case. He's not the most fluid because he is a safety moving to corner. He's not that low to the ground, but he's a very smart corner. We've even seen it at times this year, specifically like early season Philadelphia, but his ability to like cover 3, to pass off, know where he's got to be, his communication with teammates, he is outstanding in that area. So it just makes sense if he's going to get reps to do that. But I think Mike Hughes should get competition. If Will is going to play outside, I'd give Mike Hughes competition, allow him to compete with Jeff Okudah to play on the outside. I mean, I would allow him to compete with him, allow him to compete with Will Harris, Jerry Jacobs. Like, I would have open competition. Some safety over top. I think Jerry Jacobs would be probably your best example for somebody that could be physical underneath coverage with the safety over top. Jerry Jacobs is probably the best example of a guy that do that, but even Jerry last year played in a little bit more zone coverage because that's what the Lions did last year when he was playing. So I anticipate we're going to see a little bit more of maybe what we saw last year. Glenn said it today. He made it kind of clear that, yeah, getting some guys back, Kaminsky's, he said Pascal's going to be ready to go. So that makes me excited. Hopefully he's active this week. Getting those guys back will be huge, not only for the run game and allowing, again, Hutchinson to line up in different spots like they said, and of course on pass downs, right? If you have those interior pass rushers, you can move Hutch to different spots. They're going to win mainly inside. Specifically, Pascal coming out of college, he didn't win much on the outside. He could, but he didn't win much. But it'll allow Hutchinson to be a little more free with that. And again, we go back to the pressure side. For all the man that they're playing playing on third down, but really just in pass downs in general, Lions aren't getting much pressure unless they blitz, and they're still not getting home. They need guys that can win. They're winning at the lowest rate right now in pass rush win rate. Those guys will be huge for them. Of course, getting Charles back would help big time. I don't think he's going to play this week, but they need those guys back big time. But then in the back end, I anticipate we're going to see a little bit more of maybe what we saw last year, maybe dial back a little bit of the man coverage, depending on matchups. Certain matchups, if you get a team like New England where you feel like you match up pretty well, you can do that. You can go back to that. We'll see a little bit more of the zone, a little bit more disguising coverages in the back end going forward than what maybe we've seen so far this season, especially if we see more AJ and if we see more Will Harris. For me, I would say, again, if Jerry Jacobs is healthy, I'm starting him on the outside, and I like Mike Hughes at slot, but if they're going to go more zone, then I get it. I would allow Mike Hughes to legitimately have a chance to compete to start at outside corner over Jerry or over Jeff Okudah or whoever else is out there. I would allow them that opportunity. So I forgot to film an outro, so here we are. Thank you, Pat, for watching, and I'm out. I had to put that in there. I can't just have it in. With that, we're back. So I understand it was a minute since we've had a video out there. This took a lot longer than I thought it would, and I still don't feel like I maybe put everything in there that I've wanted to. So we're probably going to revisit this, especially after this week, to see the changes that they made. I love to do that. This week we didn't do the All-22 for the Patriots. I've watched it so many times, I almost feel like I've done it, but I didn't. So, yeah, we'll bounce back to it next week when we take a look at this Cowboys stuff. But the injury report, we'll take a look at that tomorrow as well. To take a look at that, I have it up. I have the Lions side. I cannot find the Cowboys side, so I've been trying to get updates that I can, just write them down. But I'll throw it up on the screen right now. So there you go. Yeah, this is weird. This is not normal. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. I'm not even putting it in the title. So shout out to everybody that's watched this point. If you watched this point, please put a hamburger or a hot dog or a chicken nugget. I don't know if they have those. They should. Put something like that in the comment section so I know. Just so I know. But there's the injury report for the Lions side so far. But yeah, I'm going to end it here. We'll be back tomorrow to take a look at that injury report. That's the plan. And then, yeah, this weekend, Cowboys. So with that, thank you, Pat, for watching. And I'm out.